step away from the vehicle. Now. Officer Ryan Keller's voice cut across the gas station lot before he ever asked why the old man on the pavement was struggling to breathe. Angela Brooks looked up from beside Earl Patterson, one hand holding a half-empty water bottle, the other two fingers resting lightly near the old veteran's wrist as she counted his pulse. The Georgia heat shimmered above the concrete, thick with the smell of gasoline, dust, and burnt coffee drifting from the convenience store. Behind Angela, a black SUV with military plates sat beside Pump 4, engine still running, hazard lights blinking like a quiet alarm. Earl's face was pale beneath his gray beard, and his chest rose too fast, too shallow. Angela kept her voice calm. "Officer, he needs medical help. Please call Fort Moore and ask for General Brooks." Keller stopped near the front of the SUV, one hand on his radio, his eyes moving over Angela's simple blouse, worn jeans, and brown skin before they reached the men she was trying to help. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Sure," he said. "And I'm the Secretary of Defense." The second patrol car rolled in behind him, tires crunching over loose gravel. A clerk stood frozen at the glass door. A pickup truck driver near Pump 2 lowered his nozzle and stared. Nobody moved toward Earl. Nobody asked Angela what she knew. They only saw a black woman beside a government vehicle, and in their minds, the story had already been written. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe and stay with Angela until the end, because what happens at this gas station will force everyone watching to ask how many lives are put at risk when prejudice speaks louder than truth. Angela did not stand up. She could not. Earl's fingers trembled against the hot concrete, searching for something solid, and she gave him her voice instead. "Earl, look at me. In for 4. Out for 6. Stay with me." The old man tried to follow, eyes locked on hers, trusting her because she had been the one who noticed the change in his breathing 10 miles back, the one who pulled off the highway, the one who bought water and asked the clerk if they had a chair. Keller's jaw tightened when she kept helping him. "Ma'am, I said step away from the vehicle." Angela looked at him, steady but urgent. "Sir, I will answer every question you have after I make sure his pulse does not drop." That answer seemed to offend him more than fear would have. Keller glanced at the SUV dashboard through the windshield, where a small military call sign card rested near the vents. He did not read it. He did not ask. He turned back to Angela with the hard certainty of a man who mistook obedience for truth. "You are not in charge here." Angela's hand never left Earl's pulse. "No," she said softly. "But I am the only one paying attention to the person who needs help." Angela Brooks had learned calm in places where calm was not a personality trait, but a way to keep people alive. Years earlier, before the quiet Georgia roads, before the gas station concrete burning through the knees of her jeans, before strangers looked at her and decided she could not possibly belong near a military vehicle, she had been an army nurse in Afghanistan, standing in canvas medical tents where every second had a job. She learned to hear the difference between panic and pain, to measure fear by breathing, to speak softly when the world around her grew loud. After she came home, people expected her to disappear into the polished life that came with being married to General Nathaniel Brooks, a 4-star officer whose name carried weight in rooms Angela rarely entered. But she had never been interested in living behind rank. She spent her mornings driving veterans to appointments, filling out benefits forms with widows at kitchen tables, sitting in hospital hallways with men who would not admit they were scared unless the lights were low and no one else was listening. That was how she met Earl Patterson, 72 years old, white-haired, stubborn, and proud enough to refuse help until Angela made it sound like he was helping her instead. Earl had served long before most people at Fort Moore knew his name, but General Brooks knew it. Years ago, Earl had pulled a younger Nathaniel Brooks out of a burning transport after a mechanical failure outside Kandahar, then refused every medal ceremony because he said the living were reward enough. Today, Earl was supposed to be honored quietly at the base, not with cameras, but with a handshake from a man who had never forgotten him. Angela had picked him up herself because Earl trusted very few people behind the wheel, and because he had called her that morning sounding weaker than he wanted to admit. 10 miles from Fort Moore, his breathing changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. A shallow catch between words. A grayness at the edge of his mouth. Angela noticed before he did. She pulled into the gas station off the state road, parked near Pump 4, left the engine running for air conditioning, and went inside for water. She was coming back out when Earl tried to step from the SUV and had to sit down hard beside the front tire, embarrassed more than frightened. Angela was already beside him before the clerk had time to react. "It is just a spell," Earl had muttered, trying to wave her off. "You can fuss at me later," Angela said, twisting open the bottle. "Right now, breathe." That was when someone called the police. Maybe they saw the military plates. Maybe they saw the black woman moving quickly around the government SUV. Maybe they saw Earl on the ground and built the wrong story around the wrong person. By the time Officer Ryan Keller arrived, Angela had Earl's breathing almost steady. Almost. Keller did not see that. He saw Angela kneeling beside an old white man, a black SUV, and a situation he believed needed his command more than her care. A younger officer stepped out from the second patrol car, her expression uncertain. Her nameplate read Reed. She looked at Earl first, then Angela, then Keller, as if the scene did not match the call. "Should we request emergency medical services?" she asked. "Not yet," Keller said, still watching Angela. "I want to know why she is in that vehicle." Angela looked up, sweat gathering at her temple, sunlight flashing along the thin wedding band on her left hand. She could have said her husband's full title. She could have used the name that opened doors and silenced rooms. But Earl's pulse fluttered beneath her fingers, and pride was less important. "Then oxygen. His medication is in the glove box," she said. "Blue bottle. Nitroglycerin tablets. Please get it." Keller gave her a narrow look. "You expect me to let you reach into a government vehicle?" Angela's face stayed still, but something in her eyes hardened. "No, officer. I expect you to care whether he keeps breathing." Earl tried to speak, but his voice came out thin and broken. "She is helping me." The words barely crossed the space between them. A truck rumbled past on the road, swallowing half the sound. Keller looked at Earl, then back at Angela, and chose not to hear him. "Stand up," he said. Angela glanced at Earl's trembling hand, then at the closed glove box, then at the officer blocking the path between a sick veteran and the medicine that could help him. "I will stand when he is stable," she said softly. "Until then, I am staying right here." Officer Ryan Keller had spent 12 years learning how to make a scene bend around his voice. On most days, that was useful. People shouted during traffic stops, cried during domestic calls, lied during theft reports, and froze during emergencies. Keller believed hesitation was dangerous, and over time that belief hardened into something less like discipline and more like instinct. He liked clean answers. Driver or passenger? Victim or suspect? Compliant or difficult? Safe or threat? The trouble was, real life rarely stayed inside those boxes, and Angela Brooks had stepped into the space between them with a sick veteran at her knees and no interest in making Keller feel in control. He had been halfway through a gas station coffee when the call came over dispatch: suspicious black female near a government vehicle, elderly male on the ground, possible theft or scam. The words arranged themselves in his mind before his patrol car crossed the county line. By the time he pulled into the lot, he had already pictured the scene. He expected excuses. He expected attitude. He expected someone testing how far they could push a uniform. What he did not expect was a woman counting breaths in a voice so steady it made his own authority sound loud and clumsy. Still, Keller trusted the call more than the woman in front of him. He trusted the military plates more than her explanation. He trusted the fear of the clerk inside the convenience store more than Earl Patterson's weak attempt to say she was helping. Officer Hannah Reed stood near the second patrol car, watching the old man's color with growing concern. She was younger than Keller by more than a decade, knew enough to still ask questions before turning them into conclusions. "Officer Keller," she said carefully, "his breathing does look labored. I think we should get the medication." Keller did not take his eyes off Angela. "And I think we should secure the scene before someone reaches into that SUV." Angela looked at him then, really looked, and there was no fear in her face. That bothered him. Not because she was threatening, but because she refused to shrink. "The glove box is unlocked," she said. "You can open it yourself. Blue bottle, right side, beside a folded base pass. Read the pass while you are there." Keller's mouth tightened. "You do not instruct officers." I am instructing anyone who wants him alive and conscious when emergency medical services arrives. The clerk behind the glass door lifted his phone higher, recording now. A woman at pump 6 whispered something to her teenage son and pulled him closer. Angela saw all of it without turning her head. The phones. The staring. The story forming in other people's eyes. She knew how quickly a calm black woman could be called aggressive for speaking clearly, how quickly concern could be renamed interference when it came from the wrong mouth. So she kept her hands visible. She kept her voice low. She kept her body angled toward Earl, because his life mattered more than her pride. Earl coughed once, shallow and dry, and Angela leaned closer. Stay with me, Earl. In for 4. Out for 6. Keller stepped forward. Stand up now. Reed shifted. Sir, maybe I should check the glove box. No, Keller said sharply. The word cut through the lot. Angela slowly lifted her eyes. Officer, you are letting your suspicion make a medical decision. For a moment, Keller said nothing. The statement hit too close to truth, and truth often sounded like disrespect to people who were not used to hearing it from someone they had already dismissed. He gestured toward Reed. Move her back. Reed hesitated just long enough for Keller to notice. Angela did not move away from Earl. If you move me, count his breathing, she said. Do not let him talk too much. Keep him upright. And please, get the blue bottle. The plea was not for herself. That should have changed the room of air around them. It did not change Keller fast enough. Officer Hannah Reed took one careful step toward the SUV, not because Keller had allowed it, but because Earl Patterson's breathing had begun to slip out of rhythm. The old veteran's shoulders rose too high, then dropped too fast, and the sound that came from him was thin enough to make the clerk lower his phone for the first time. Angela saw it instantly. Earl, eyes on me, she said, still calm, though every second now had weight. In for 4. Out for 6. Do not chase the breath. Let it come back to you. Keller moved between Angela and the vehicle, his face tightening as if her steadiness were a challenge. I gave you a lawful order. Angela looked up from the concrete, sweat shining along her temple, dust clinging to one knee of her jeans. And I gave you a medical warning. Reed glanced at Keller. Sir, I can retrieve the medication. She told us where it is. Step back, Reed. The younger officer stopped, but her eyes stayed on Earl, not Angela. That small difference mattered. Angela felt it the way a person feels the first cool edge of shade after standing too long in heat. Someone was beginning to see the scene as it was. But Keller was still trapped inside the one he had brought with him. He reached toward Angela, not roughly, but with the finality of a man choosing control over care. On your feet. Angela rose slowly, both hands visible, her voice never rising. His pulse is uneven. The blue bottle is in the glove box. Emergency medical services needs to be called now. If he becomes unresponsive, tell them he has a cardiac history and took his last dose at 7 this morning. Earl lifted one trembling hand toward her. Angie, he whispered. The name was soft, familiar, and full of trust. Keller heard it. For one flicker of a second, confusion crossed his face. Then he buried it under authority. Turn around. A low murmur moved through the gas station lot. The woman at pump 6 covered her mouth. The teenager beside her stared at Keller, then at Angela, as if learning something ugly in real time. Angela turned, not because Keller was right, but because she knew what the crowd would call her if she made him force the point. She had lived long enough to understand that a black woman's fear was rarely granted the dignity of being called fear. So she gave them stillness. She gave them open hands. She gave them no excuse. Keller secured her wrists in front of her, and the metal clicked in the hot air with a small sound that seemed far louder than it was. Angela closed her eyes for one breath, then opened them and looked straight at Reed. Please, she said. Get the medicine. Reed did not wait this time. She moved to the passenger side of the SUV and opened the door. Keller turned sharply. Reed. Sir, he needs help. Her voice shook, but she kept moving. She opened the glove box, found the blue bottle exactly where Angela said it would be, and beside it a folded base pass stamped with Fort Moore authorization. Behind the pass was a laminated card with a call sign printed in bold black letters, Brooks Actual. Reed went still. "Officer Keller," she said, quieter now. Keller was guiding Angela toward the patrol car, but the shift in Reed's voice made him stop. "What?" Reed held up the card. Sunlight flashed over the lamination. "This vehicle is assigned to a military security detail." Angela looked at Earl, not Keller. "One tablet under his tongue if he is alert enough. Do not let him swallow it whole." Reed dropped to one knee beside Earl, following Angela's instructions while reaching for her radio to request emergency medical services. Keller stared at the card as if it had insulted him. "That does not prove she belongs in it." Angela stood beside the patrol car, wrists restrained, face composed in a way that made his doubt look smaller than ever. "Then call Fort Moore," she said. "Ask them why General Brooks is waiting for Earl Patterson, and why his wife is late." The gas station went quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and Earl's uneven breathing. For the first time that morning, Keller had no quick answer. The blue bottle changed the temperature of the entire gas station lot. Not the Georgia heat, which still pressed down on the pumps and windshields like a hand, but the human temperature, the way people looked at one another when certainty began to melt into doubt. Officer Hannah Reed knelt beside Earl Patterson with the medication in her palm, speaking gently as she followed Angela's instructions. "Mr. Patterson, I am going to help you take this. Stay with me." Earl's eyes fluttered toward Angela, still standing beside the patrol car with her wrist secured in front of her. She gave him a small nod, the kind she had given frightened soldiers years ago when alarms sounded outside canvas walls and fear had to wait until later. "You are doing fine, Earl," she said. "Let it dissolve. Slow breath. In for 4. Out for 6. Keller stood between them, holding the laminated call sign card as if it were a puzzle piece that refused to fit the picture in his head. Brooks Actual. Fort Moore authorization. A government SUV exactly where Angela said it belonged. A blue bottle exactly where Angela said it would be. A veteran responding to her voice like she was the safest thing on that stretch of asphalt. Every detail had been available to him from the beginning. He had simply chosen the wrong thing to trust. Still, pride fought hard. "This does not explain why you did not identify yourself properly," Keller said. Angela looked at him, and for the first time that morning, her calm carried a visible edge. "I identified the emergency. You ignored it." The words were quiet, but they reached the clerk at the door, the woman at pump 6, the teenage boy holding his breath beside her, and Reed, whose hand paused for half a second before she resumed checking Earl's condition. Keller's radio crackled. Dispatch asked for an update. Reed answered before Keller could shape the scene into something easier. Emergency medical services requested. Elderly male with cardiac history at County Route gas station. Medication administered. Also requesting verification through Fort Moore Command for military vehicle call sign Brooks Actual and passenger Angela Brooks. Angela closed her eyes briefly when Reed said the name. Not because she wanted the rank attached to it, but because the truth was finally entering the air through a channel Keller could not dismiss as attitude. Keller turned toward Reed. "I did not authorize that verification." Reed stood slowly, still keeping Earl in view. "Sir, we have a medical emergency and a military authorization issue. Verification is appropriate." A long silence followed. Far off, traffic moved along the highway, tires whispering over sun-softened pavement. The gas pump beside the SUV clicked and reset after being idle too long. Earl's breathing began to steady, not fully, but enough that Angela's shoulders lowered a fraction. Even restrained, even humiliated in front of strangers, she was watching the rise and fall of his chest more closely than anyone else. Keller saw that, and it angered him because it made him look smaller. "You expect me to believe you are General Brooks' wife?" he asked. Angela did not flinch. "No, officer. I expected you to believe a man needed help." Reed's radio answered with a new voice, sharper than dispatch, official and alert. "This is Fort Moore Command Desk responding to County Unit. Confirm call sign Brooks Actual. Confirm Angela Brooks is authorized family personnel and registered medical volunteer. Confirm Earl Patterson is expected on base as an honored guest of General Nathaniel Brooks. The words rolled across the lot like thunder without volume. The clerk lowered his phone completely. The woman at pump 6 looked away, ashamed. Keller's face drained of its hard certainty, leaving behind something pale and exposed. The voice on the radio continued, colder now. County unit, explain why General Brooks' wife is being verified from a gas station instead of escorted to base. Reed looked at Angela. Angela looked at Earl. Keller looked at the restrained hands he had refused to see as hands belonging to a helper. Before he could answer, another sound reached them from the road, sirens, still distant but coming closer. Emergency medical services at last. Angela exhaled slowly, not in relief for herself, but for Earl. Keller stepped toward her, keys in hand, but his movement had lost all authority. It looked almost like a man approaching the truth after trying to outrun it. Angela met his eyes as he unlocked the restraints. She did not pull away. She did not speak first. The metal opened with a small click, and her hands came free in the sunlight. Then she walked past Keller without a glance, returned to Earl's side, and placed 2 fingers near his wrist again. There you are, she whispered to the old veteran. Stay with me. Help is coming. Keller stood behind her with the keys still in his hand, surrounded by witnesses, radio static, and the unbearable sound of a woman caring for someone after he had treated her like a threat. The emergency medical services unit arrived in a rush of red light and controlled motion, its tires crunching over gravel as it pulled beside pump 4. 2 paramedics stepped out with practiced calm, carrying a medical bag and a folded stretcher, and for the first time since the call began, the attention of the gas station shifted fully to the men who had needed it all along. Angela stayed close enough for Earl to see her, but far enough to give the paramedics room. 72 years old, she said clearly. Known cardiac history. Nitroglycerin given under the tongue about 3 minutes ago. Breathing has steadied, but he is still weak. He has not lost consciousness. One paramedic looked at her with immediate respect, the kind that comes when someone recognizes competence without needing a title attached. Are you medical? Angela nodded once. Former Army nurse. Keller stood a few feet away, silent. The words former Army nurse reached him with more force than the confirmation from Fort Moore had. He had missed that too. Not hidden. Not impossible to know. Simply unasked. Reed gave emergency medical services the medication bottle and stepped aside, her expression tense with the knowledge that the morning had almost gone very differently. Earl reached for Angela as the paramedics checked him, and she leaned down so he would not have to lift his voice. Did I miss the ceremony? He whispered. Angela smiled for the first time, small and tired. Not if I have anything to say about it. Earl's mouth curved weakly. General will fuss. Let him, she said. You scared me first. The quiet exchange softened the air around them, but Keller seemed trapped outside it. His radio had gone still, yet the Fort Moore command desk's question remained in the space between the pumps. Why was General Brooks' wife being verified from a gas station instead of escorted to base? Keller had no answer that did not sound like an accusation against himself. The clerk came out with a bottle of cold water and stopped several feet from Angela, suddenly unsure how to approach a woman he had watched being restrained without saying a word. Ma'am, he said, holding it out, I am sorry. I should have asked what was happening. Angela accepted the bottle, not because the apology was enough, but because refusing it would not help Earl. Next time, she said gently, ask before you assume. The clerk lowered his eyes. Reed heard that too. So did Keller. Sunlight flashed across the SUV windshield, and for the first time Keller actually read the call sign card on the dashboard, the base pass, the medical volunteer decal near the lower corner of the glass. The scene had been speaking from the beginning. He had just listened to his suspicion louder. A black sedan appeared at the far edge of the lot, followed by a second vehicle with military plates. They did not speed in recklessly. They moved with steady purpose, the way authority looks when it does not need to perform. Keller straightened instinctively. Angela turned her head, and something in her face changed, not relief exactly, but the release of knowing someone who loved her had arrived and would see the whole truth without needing proof of her worth. General Nathaniel Brooks stepped from the sedan in a dark service uniform, tall, composed, his silver hair cropped close, his face controlled in public the way soldiers learn to be. But his eyes went directly to Angela's wrists first. Not to the SUV. Not to Keller. To the faint marks left where the restraints had been. The temperature of the lot changed again. No one spoke as he crossed the concrete. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He removed his jacket and placed it gently around Angela's shoulders, shielding her from the heat, the cameras, the staring, and the humiliation people had mistaken for procedure. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Angela shook her head, though both of them knew harm was not always something that showed on skin. "Earl needs transport," she said. "He is stable, but he needs evaluation." General Brooks looked at the paramedics, then at Earl, and his expression softened with recognition. "Mr. Patterson," he said, voice thick with respect. "You still making people worry about you?" Earl managed a faint smile. "Only the important ones, General." For a moment, the gas station was no longer a scene of suspicion. It was a field of witness. Keller stood alone near his patrol car, watching the woman he had dismissed become the person everyone now followed. Angela adjusted the jacket over her shoulders, then looked back at him. Not with triumph. Not with cruelty. Just with a truth steady enough to leave no room for escape. "You saw my skin before you saw his pain," she said. The words did not echo, but they settled over every person in the lot. Keller opened his mouth, but no apology came out. Not yet. He had finally reached the place where words were too small and accountability had to begin. The ambulance doors closed around Earl Patterson with a soft mechanical thud, and the sound seemed to release the breath everyone had been holding. Angela stood beside the black SUV with General Brooks' jacket over her shoulders, watching the paramedics prepare to leave for the military hospital at Fort Moore. Earl lifted one hand from inside the ambulance, weak but stubborn, and Angela raised hers back. "I will be right behind you," she called, her voice steady enough to make the promise believable. General Nathaniel Brooks stood at her side, close but not crowding her, the way a man stands beside someone he respects, not someone he needs to rescue. Officer Ryan Keller remained near his patrol car, the keys still in his hand, his face emptied of the sharp confidence he had arrived with. Officer Hannah Reed had moved to the shade near the convenience store, speaking into her radio and documenting every detail with a precision that did not protect Keller from the truth. The clerk had gone back inside, but the phone in his hand was gone now. The woman at Pump 6 no longer pretended not to watch. Her teenage son stared at Angela with the quiet seriousness of someone who had seen authority fail and courage remain calm. General Brooks finally turned toward Keller. He did not raise his voice. That made it worse. "Officer," he said, "my wife told you a man needed medical attention." Keller swallowed. "General, I responded to a report of possible unauthorized access to a government vehicle." "And when you arrived?" General Brooks asked. "What did you see?" Keller's eyes flicked toward Angela, then toward the spot on the concrete where Earl had been sitting. "I saw her beside the vehicle." "No," Angela said softly. Keller looked at her. The whole lot seemed to listen. She took one step forward, the jacket shifting around her shoulders, the faint marks near her wrists visible in the sunlight. "You saw a black woman beside a military vehicle, and you decided that was the emergency." Keller's mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time, he did not reach for procedure. He did not reach for the call. He did not reach for the badge on his chest. He stood there with nothing between him and what he had done. Reed lowered her radio and watched him carefully. General Brooks' voice stayed controlled. "My wife is a former Army nurse. She has treated soldiers under pressure most people cannot imagine. She spends her time helping veterans who have been forgotten by the same country they served. Earl Patterson is alive and on his way to care because she noticed what others missed." Keller's gaze dropped. The Georgia heat pressed down on his shoulders, but it was not the heat making him look smaller. "I made a mistake," he said. Angela shook her head once. Not angry. Not gentle either. "A mistake is turning down the wrong road." This was a choice repeated several times. "I told you he needed medicine. You chose suspicion. He told you I was helping. You chose not to hear him." Officer Reed saw the problem and tried to act. "You chose to stop her." Each sentence landed cleanly, without cruelty, because truth did not need decoration. Keller looked toward Reed then, and shame moved across his face when he saw that she was not looking away for him. General Brooks took Angela's hand, but he let her keep speaking. "I do not need you to be embarrassed because of who my husband is," Angela said. "I need you to be disturbed by who you were willing to ignore before you knew his name." The words made the air still. Even the gas pump screens seemed too bright, too ordinary for what had just been named. Keller finally nodded, but it was not enough, and everyone there knew it. "I am sorry, Mrs. Brooks," he said. Angela held his gaze. "Start with the report. Write what happened. Do not polish it. Do not hide behind confusing language. If you want the apology to mean anything, tell the truth when it costs you something." Keller's eye shifted to the dash camera on his patrol car, then to Reed's body camera, then to the scattered witnesses around the lot. The truth was already there, recorded in pieces. But Angela was asking for something harder than evidence. She was asking him to stop lying to himself. The ambulance pulled away, siren low and controlled, heading toward Fort Moore. Angela turned to watch it go, her face softening for Earl. General Brooks leaned closer and asked, "Do you want to ride with him?" Angela nodded. "Yes. But first, Officer Reed needs my statement." Reed stepped forward, surprised. "Ma'am, you do not have to do that right now." Angela looked at Keller one last time, then at the place where Earl had nearly been forgotten. "Yes," she said. "I do." Officer Hannah Reed took Angela's statement in the narrow strip of shade beside the convenience store, where the afternoon light cut the gas station lot into bright concrete and muted shelter. Angela stood with General Brooks' jacket still resting over her shoulders, her voice even, her hands relaxed at her sides, though the faint pressure marks near her wrists had not yet faded. She described the first change in Earl's breathing, the decision to pull off the road, the location of the medication, the warning she had given, and the moment Keller chose to move her away instead of letting Reed get the blue bottle. She did not exaggerate. She did not soften it either. Reed wrote quickly, occasionally looking up with the kind of attention Angela had been asking for from the beginning. Keller stood several yards away, close enough to hear every word, far enough to understand he was no longer controlling the story. When Angela finished, Reed lowered her notebook. "Thank you, ma'am," she said. "I will make sure this is entered exactly as you said it." Angela studied her for a moment. "Make sure you include what you saw too. Not just what he did. What you almost did not do." Reed's face changed, the lesson turning inward. She nodded. "Yes, ma'am." General Brooks opened the passenger door of the SUV for Angela, but before she climbed in, Keller stepped forward. He had removed his sunglasses. Without them, he looked less like authority and more like a man who had discovered something ugly in himself under a public light. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, then stopped because the title felt suddenly too small and too convenient. "Angela," he corrected carefully, then looked to General Brooks as if asking whether he had overstepped. Angela answered first. "Mrs. Brooks is fine." Keller accepted the boundary with a slow nod. "Mrs. Brooks, I am sorry. Not because of who your husband is. Because you were trying to save someone, and I treated you like you were the danger." The lot stayed quiet around them. A truck passed on the highway. The American flag outside the store snapped once in the hot wind. Angela did not rush to forgive him for the comfort of the witnesses. She had seen that kind of apology before, the kind offered quickly so everyone could move on before the pain had been named. "You should apologize to Earl too," she said. Keller looked toward the road where the ambulance had disappeared. "I will." "And to Officer Reed," Angela added. Reed looked startled. Keller turned to her, and shame deepened in his face. "You were right to question me," he said. "I should not have shut you down." Reed swallowed, then nodded once. It was not reconciliation. It was a beginning. General Brooks watched silently, his hand resting near the open door, his expression steady but not cold. He had commanded rooms filled with medals and maps, but this small gas station held a different kind of battlefield, the place where a man had to decide whether regret would become accountability or just embarrassment. Keller took a breath. "I will write the report myself. I will include the restraints, the delayed medication, the verification from Fort Moore, and the body camera footage. I will request supervisory review. Angela held his gaze. Do not request it like a favor. Submit it like a duty. Keller nodded again, slower this time. Yes, ma'am. Only then did Angela step into the SUV. General Brooks closed the door gently, then walked around to the driver's side. Before he got in, he looked at Keller. His voice remained low, but every word carried weight. Rank made you listen after the fact. Humanity should have made you listen before it. Keller had no answer. The SUV pulled away from the gas station, following the route toward Fort Moore and the hospital where Earl was being evaluated. In the passenger seat, Angela looked out at the road unrolling ahead, fields and pine trees blurring under the late sun. Her hands rested in her lap. They were free now, but she could still feel the memory of being held back while someone needed her. General Brooks glanced at her once, not asking for words she did not yet have. After several miles, Angela finally spoke. I do not want this buried. He kept his eyes on the road. It will not be. At the military hospital, Earl was awake when they arrived, pale but smiling from the bed, medical monitors tracing steady lines beside him. Angela stepped into the room, and the old veteran lifted 2 fingers in a tired salute. Told you I was hard to get rid of, he murmured. Angela sat beside him and took his hand. And I told you to stop scaring people. Earl looked past her at General Brooks, then back at Angela. She saved me, General. General Brooks smiled softly. I know. Earl shook his head. No. I mean before today too. People like me get forgotten. She does not. Forget. Angela looked down, blinking once, and the room grew quiet around the truth of that. Outside the hospital window, the sun lowered behind Fort Moore, turning the glass gold. The ceremony would wait. The speeches would wait. What mattered was that Earl was alive, Angela had been heard, and one officer's prejudice would no longer be able to hide behind procedure without being named. The ceremony at Fort Moore took place 3 days later, not in the large hall originally prepared, but in a smaller outdoor courtyard where Earl Patterson could sit comfortably beneath the shade of a white canopy. The Georgia air was warm, the grass freshly cut, and the American flag moved gently above the rows of soldiers, veterans, families, and medical staff who had gathered with quiet respect. Earl wore a pressed shirt and a borrowed blazer, his hands folded over a blanket on his lap, looking embarrassed by the attention and grateful to be alive enough to complain about it. Angela Brooks stood beside him, not in a formal gown, not behind her husband's rank, but in a simple navy dress with General Brooks' hand resting lightly at her back. She looked calm, but those who knew how to see could tell the gas station had not left her completely. Sometimes humiliation does not disappear when the restraints come off. Sometimes it stays in the body like a sound only the heart can hear. Officer Hannah Reed attended in uniform, standing near the back with her hands clasped, her report already filed without softening a single fact. Officer Ryan Keller was not there. His department had placed him on administrative leave pending review, and the body camera footage, witness statements, dispatch records, and Fort Moore verification call had all become part of the investigation. The point was not revenge. Angela had said that clearly. The point was truth written plainly enough that it could not be buried under words like confusion, tension, or misunderstanding. When General Nathaniel Brooks stepped to the microphone, the courtyard settled into silence. He spoke first about Earl, about courage shown years ago in a place far from home, about a life saved and a debt remembered. Earl looked down through most of it, smiling like a man who wished someone would talk about the weather instead. Then the general turned toward Angela. His voice changed, not louder, but deeper. My wife is not powerful because she carries my name, he said. She is powerful because when a man was in distress and others saw suspicion, she saw a human being. She chose mercy under pressure. She chose calm when she was humiliated. She chose to keep helping even after she was treated as if she did not belong. No one clapped at first. The words needed room to land. Angela looked at Earl, and Earl reached for her hand. She took it. In the front row, a young soldier wiped his eyes quickly and looked away. Reed lowered her head, not from shame alone, but from understanding. A week later, the police department announced policy changes. Medical emergencies would require immediate emergency medical services evaluation before nonviolent suspicion took priority. all stops involving government or military vehicles would require verification before escalation, and all officers would complete updated racial bias and de-escalation training. Keller's final disciplinary outcome would take longer, but his written statement did not hide from the central truth. He wrote that he had treated Angela as a suspect before treating Earl as a patient, and that his assumptions had delayed care. Angela read only that sentence once. Then she closed the report. She did not need to keep reopening the wound to prove it had been real. Life moved forward, but not untouched. Earl recovered well enough to joke that Angela had ruined his reputation by making him look fragile in front of half the county. Reed requested additional medical response training and began teaching younger officers to ask one extra question before acting on the first assumption. Angela returned to driving veterans to appointments, sitting with widows, filling out forms, and answering late-night calls from people who trusted her because she never made them feel small for needing help. At the gas station, the clerk placed a small sign near the register that read, "Ask first. Assume last." It was not a monument, but Angela smiled when she saw it weeks later. Near sunset, she and General Brooks drove past that same stretch of road on the way back from the hospital. The pumps glowed under the evening lights. The concrete looked ordinary again. That was the strange thing about places where injustice happens. They do not always look changed afterward. People have to be the ones who change. Angela watched the gas station fade in the side mirror, then looked at her hands resting free in her lap. Kindness had not made her weak that day. It had made her strong enough to keep seeing Earl when others saw only suspicion, strong enough to speak the truth without cruelty, and strong enough to demand accountability without surrendering her humanity. So if you had been standing in that gas station, hearing a black woman ask for help while everyone else doubted her, would you have listened before the proof arrived, or would you have waited until power told you she mattered?